This is Miss Ayn Rand, Mrs. Ayn Rand, really, and she was an atheist. And this was the last installment that I left behind. And she said, every argument for God and every attribute ascribed to him rests on a false metaphysical premise. Okay, so she's talking about, when she says every argument for God, she's talking about the existence of God. Okay, that's what she's talking about. Objectivism advocates reason as man's sole means of knowledge, and therefore, for the reasons I have already given, it is atheist. Okay? It denies any supernatural dimension presented as a contradiction of nature of existence. She's talking about the existence of God. And she says God does not exist. And all she's saying right there is that that's her opinion. That's all she said so far. I mean, she's saying, I don't believe in God. That's all she's saying. And in the existence of God. She hasn't justified anything. And the question is, what does she mean by exist? And so we have to move to that point because it's about existence. And this is her version of existence. She says, to exist is to be something, as distinguished from the nothing of non-existence. So far she said nothing. Reality is that which exists. The unreal does not exist. The unreal is merely the negation of existence. Again, a lot of word wizardry. She said absolutely nothing. And she goes to more circular reasoning, saying A is A thing is itself. Okay, so she's going around in circles there, you know. Existence is identity, whatever that is. Consciousness is identification. Interesting, because nobody has ever defined consciousness. And to exist is to possess identity. So far she's got nothing. So far she said a bunch of blah, blah, blah with no meaning whatsoever. Okay, let's see if we can get that last line. It says, existence exists. Again, nonsense. That statement implies two corollary actions. Something exists which one perceives. She introduces as an observer, says only if the guy perceives it, it exists. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. You know, so depending on what perception means, I mean, are we talking about touch here? Are we talking about seeing? Are we talking about hearing, tasting, smelling? What are we talking about when we say something exists? And then says, one exists possessing consciousness, okay? Consciousness being the faculty of perceiving that which exists. Again, a lot of circular arguments and lousy definitions that are useless, completely useless, okay? So none of that has any sense in science. What is my counterpart to that? Well, here it is. Okay, that's Martin Luther Bill, and it says, let's put him over here. In science, it is irrational to say, I believe or I know that God exists, which is what the theists say. I believe or know, right, that God doesn't exist. That's what the atheist says, you know, Ayn Rand. And then the agnostic says, I don't know whether God exists. How do you prove God's existence? Or, you know, is there a way? Or I don't think there is a way. And, you know, they go through all this nonsense. All those three belong to religion, including what Ayn Rand said. And unless you understand this, you don't understand the rational scientific method. This is absolutely critical. So all I can ask you is to pay attention. You don't have to accept it. I'm saying if you want to understand the rational scientific method, you really have to understand the issue of atheism and the issue of existence, because they are part of the foundations of the rational scientific method. In science, we say, let us assume that God exists. And now you can use that assumption to explain your theory. Whether people believe your theory or not, that's a separate issue. That's a personal issue. But at least people will understand your theory because you have made an assumption. And that's the way science works. And here's the definition of existence, just in case, because we have to define what existence means. And here we have it. Exists, it's physical presence. Means that it has to have an object. Okay, it's got to be an object. An object is that which has shape. And that object has to have location. If the object does not have location, it does not exist. What do we mean by that? Well, location is the set of distances from that object, from the surface or the center, wherever you want to take it from. Depends on everybody's definition, not important. The distance from that object to all the other matter in the universe. So if God wants to exist, all he's got to do is meet the definition that you see there. So he's got to have physical presence. He's got to be an object first, and he's got to have location. He's got to have distance with respect to my chest, your hair, your whatever. Okay? He's got to have distance. Otherwise, he doesn't exist. And there is no way God can hide in the 5th dimension or the 26th dimension of string theory or whatever. He can't hide over there because there's still a straight line from him to me. I don't care where he wants to hide. in the 26th dimensional universe, fine, he can hide anywhere he wants. There's got to be a straight line from him to me anyways. Otherwise, he doesn't exist by definition. It's by definition, not because I believe. And you can see there's no provision for belief or knowledge in the definition there. God exists by definition if he meets the condition, the criteria, the specification of the definition. Okay? And then, of course, here's the scientific method. And this is where we part company with what we see out there today in the so-called scientific world. And what we see is that we have 3 parts to it: step 1, step 2, and step 3. First step is hypothesis, because you're going to be explaining a theory, a mechanism, especially if you're doing physics, to someone else. And you want him to understand you, not to believe you, but to understand what you're saying. They have to understand the mechanism. Okay, so you got to present the object. What object is doing the acting? Who is the actor in your movie? That's what we need to find out. You're going to explain a brick going through a window. Who's the actor? The brick. So you present the brick. Now you're going to explain your theory how the window broke, but you have to present the brick. You have to have definitions, solid definitions, so that people can follow your train of thought. And you have to present the initial scene, because you're going to explain a mechanism. You're going to have the first frames of your film. Every movie starts at a frame. You can't start in the middle of your movie. You got to start at the beginning. Okay, and so it's a film strip, and that's going to be your mechanism. It's got to have a first frame, and that's what the initial scene is. So you got to have an initial scene, the definitions in the objects, and that forms what we call the hypothesis, the assumptions. Then the theory has to follow from that. Okay, you can't have a theory that doesn't use those objects. Why did you present them? You have to use those objects. And so you're going to explain the mechanisms, the causes, what caused something to happen. Explain the mechanism. And if someone doesn't want to believe you, well, that's fine. You're not there to be believed, you're there to be understood. That's the point of science. And then you have your interpretations and corollaries of, your interpretation of how, because there could be several viewpoints for the same theory. Okay, so that's the scientific method. And to finish up here, since I'm on the last minute here, here we have the difference between science and religion. And what we have, people like Ayn Rand would fall on the right-hand side. She was an atheist, and atheism is part of the irrational theories. Why is atheism right there at the bottom right? You'll see atheism together with theism and agnosticism. Why is atheism there as under religion? Because it talks about belief. Ayn Rand talked about her opinions. And we don't care about her opinions. We want to have a definition for the word exist, and then we know whether God exists or not if we just, apply the definition. And that's not what Ayn Rand did. She, in fact, did what you see there also on the right-hand side in religion under epistemology. She talked about all these words: truth, fact, knowledge, proof, evidence, consciousness, sensations, and perception. That's what Ayn Rand was all about. She was all about religion. Why? Because she applied all this to politics. She was giving you a formula for how politics should be run. What, like saying, if you don't follow my recommendations, well, then you'll see what happens to you. Capitalism cannot continue, or whatever. Whatever conclusion she reached. And of course, she relied a lot on perception, and what you see the 5 senses there. And those belong to religion. In science, we do not use observers. We do not use the senses. The only sense we use is the common sense, which is the least common of all senses. Okay, what we do in physics, especially, we try to explain causes and mechanisms. For that, you need objects and you need definitions. So you can see the difference. Hopefully you can see the difference between what Ayn Rand did, talking about atheism and the fact that she says there is no God, just a statement, just her belief, and just dismissing that and saying, you know, I'm going to do this in a different way. Fine, you know, but that's only a recommendation. That's only for the purposes of politics, which is just a branch of religion. It's got nothing to do with rational science, where you say, look, I don't care if you believe in me or not, I just want you to understand what I'm presenting. That's different. That's a different approach to science. And that's what we do here in rational science.